Alright, so we've just finished building these two frames behind me, and I'm going to take you through a walkthrough, show you everything we've done, and we're going to have a look at every single component of the frame. I want to talk about every small detail of the frame, what the things are called, and also what their purpose is. So we're actually going to start this tour at the back of the house. This is a big grand living area. As you can see, it's quite large. I think we've got 3.4 meter ceilings here, and we'll start from here, make our way to the front of the house, and then we'll go upstairs and have a look at everything on our way. So I think the best way to start this is starting with the actual walls. Our walls are pretty straightforward. We've got this bottom bit of timber here, which is called our bottom plate, our studs in between it running all the way up, and then we've got our top plates on the top. One thing we do in Australia is have these nogs, which have to go in between studs everywhere around in the frame. What the nogs do is they help tie the studs together. They stop the studs potentially buckling and falling to the side once weight's loaded down on the roof. And I know we do this in Australia. I've noticed in places such as the US, you don't really see nogs as much. The reason for that is in the US, you'll go through and have ply sheeting on all of your external walls. You'll shoot your ply to the studs, and that's going to do the same purpose as the nogs. For our nogs in between our studs, we can't have them further apart than 1350. So at the back here, we've got these grand 3.4 meter walls. That's why you're going to see a double nog line to help brace these studs in place. By the time we get to the front and upstairs, we're going to notice that there's only one row of nogs between our walls. So on our walls, we can notice a few things straight away. If we come up here, we can see we've got some straps over our studs, we've got some cross braces, and we've also got some concrete screws down onto the ground. There's a bit going on right here. We'll start with the concrete screws. So if we have a look through the wall frame, there's actually not too many of them. We normally would find one on either end of the cross brace because we want to screw down the frame at this brace point, and we've also got one in the middle. Just because they're spread out that far apart doesn't mean that's the only fixing for our bottom plate. If we have a look in between these concrete screws, we've also got concrete nails. And the process we do when building these walls is we'll stand them up, go through with concrete nails, nail the frame down. That's going to lock it in place, it's going to lock it in its spot, and then afterwards we'll come through with these concrete screws. And the concrete screws are just to help brace it down where we have our wall bracing. So these cross braces here, they're one type of wall bracing, and they're going to stop this wall from moving back and forth that way. In a house, we're typically going to find 2, maybe 3 types of bracing. The first one will be these cross braces here, which are just shot to every stud on a big cross like that, and that's going to brace the wall. The more superior type of bracing are these ply sheets behind me. So these are kind of covered by the fly screens, but you can see this wall has a bit of ply on it, and you can probably see that there's heaps and heaps of nails. We're going to nail them off pretty close together. For the uprights, it's every 100 mil, and for the top plate and bottom plate, it's every 50 mil. So these ply sheets are one of the better types of bracing. They're really going to lock the wall in place, and one level above the ply sheet are our power trusses. We've walked past a few so far, and these aren't actually too common. I've recently started seeing more of these power trusses in Australia, but normally these are only used when you have a very small wall section like this that has to be braced, because this is holding a lot of upstairs. It's bracing a lot of the house. And if we put a ply sheet on it, it's not going to be able to brace the wall enough. So that's when we upgrade to these power trusses. These are pretty full on. You can obviously see they're pre-made. We don't make them on site. And all we do is come through, bolt them down into the ground. These are going about 150 mil into the ground. Once they're bolted down and tied off, they're not going to move at all. So what we do is connect our frame to these power trusses, and that's really going to stabilize our frame up. One thing I did quickly go through before, and I almost forgot to talk about it again, and I'm actually looking at this wall right now, and I can actually see we need to do a few more of them. It isn't completely done, but that is these wall straps here. These straps are just going to be an extra little thing to secure our frames together. They're going to wrap underneath the bottom plate, come up either side of the stud, and shoot into the stud. And that's just going to stop the stud trying to pull off from the bottom plate if this house is hit with wind and tries to pull the house up. So where we put these studs is typically on the inside of these cross braces. Any of these brace points, we want to make sure that the cross brace doesn't have tension and try to pull that stud up. So that's why we have the strap there. And that's also helping connect this stud down to the bottom plate where we got that concrete screw. We've got a really strong, solid connection there with that concrete screw, and we want to continue that up. So we put the strap on here. That helps hold the stud to the bottom plate. And if we look up, we've got a strap on the same stud, which helps hold the top plate down to that stud. I said we don't have enough from this wall. Normally where we put these straps is going to be where these cross braces are. On a roof like this here, where we have trusses, we actually want the straps to be every 1800. So we are missing a strap on the stud here. I've just noticed that doing this video, it's a good pickup for us, so we're gonna run through and do that. All right, so I think that's most of the frame covered in terms of the walls. One thing we can see is obviously a massive white wall behind this frame. These are Hebel panels, and this is actually our party wall separating both units together. The main reason we use a Hebel wall here is because it is a fire resistant material, and we got to make sure we got a fire resistant wall between both units. There's multiple ways you can do it, a few different products that you can use for this little wall. I'm a big fan of Hebel because it also is quite thick. This is 50 mil thick, and it does help with a bit of soundproofing too. We got one of the boys in the other unit, he's on the grinder right now. You might be hearing a little bit of that, but that Hebel wall is actually blocking out a lot of that sound, making it a bit easier to film this video. So we do have the Hebel wall here. You can see a lot of that excess adhesive which we have to use to coat the joins. And you can also see we've got a lot of our right angle brackets screwing that Hebel wall and the frame together. So obviously another thing we can see here is we've started to go through and put in our sliding doors in our windows. That's the one thing I'm focusing on today. I'm going around plumbing them up, making sure they're all level at the same height with each other. But that's also a main difference on how we build houses in Australia compared to the other parts of the world. I don't necessarily think it's better, but windows is part of the frame order, so it means the frame's not completed, our job's not done until the windows are in. In other places around the world, you'd see them go through, wrap the house up with a paper, and then you put the windows in afterwards. The reason that could be a beneficial way to do it is if you paper over the window join, you can cut your paper or wrap it around your stud, and it just makes it a little bit easier to get that really tight seal around the window. If we have a look at our framing around the window, we've got our sill, which is the timbers underneath the window to help support that window. So this is built just as any other normal wall. We've got our sill plate through here and all of our studs below that holding up its weight. Depending where you are around the world or who you ask, there's probably 100 different names that people call this. We just call this a window sill, and the timbers above the window are going to be called a window header. If we look further up, we've actually got that beam above the window too. That's our lintel, and that's going to be going across the window to help support any weight of the roof above us. Another thing we're doing is strapping over the lintel. That strap you see up there is actually going across the lintel on the other side, holding that down. And whatever stud we do the strap on the top, we're going to follow that down, and we're going to be doing a strap on the bottom to help hold everything together. All right, so we're going to start making our way towards the front of the frame now. And we'll have a look at a few different ways that we frame the walls and a few things we do. So one thing I want to point out is the way we frame our studs, especially around the corners. Wherever we have a corner where a wall intersects to another wall, it's called a junction. And if we actually jump around to the other side, you can see this is our junction here. We've got some blocks in the middle there, which we call junction blocks. And the reason we have all these studs here is for the plaster once the frame's done. On any corner, you can even see on this other side here, we always want to have two studs like this, so you can have your plaster sheet that way, and you've got that corner to screw onto. The reason we've also got these junction blocks in the middle there is firstly to pack out that stud to where it needs to be, and secondly, when we come through to straighten this frame up, I'm going to put my straight edge on the stud here. It's still got a bit of movement. I can move that back and forth. I want to get that straight, and then we're going to shoot that into those junction blocks and lock it in place. The reason we don't do it on the frame stage is it's still exposed to the weather. It could be a few weeks, at the worst a few months, until we actually come through and do the lockup. Normally a few weeks, a few months is pretty extensive. But in that time, the weather can influence the stud. It could move, it could warp very slightly. So that's why we want to make sure we leave it until the lockup stage when all the frame's sealed. So we can see we've got our junctions there. A few other things we can see is where we got a lot of studs grouped up together. Even these slightly darker looking studs here, these are called S17 studs. They're a stronger kill-dry material made for a load point. We've got a steel beam above us here, so that's why we got those studs grouped up there to support the weight. And you can also see we've got double studs where the windows are. We spoke about the lintels before, holding the weight of the roof above the window. And these double studs are our load studs to hold that weight all the way down. Something else we've got going on here, and this is a bit unusual that I don't normally see. We've actually got a double S17 stud below the window. That S17 is the same material we have here. It's that strong timber that we're using for the load point for that steel. And the reason we have it behind this window, which I don't really know if it's going to be needed, but it's what the engineer told us to do, So this double F17 is there to stop the sill plate moving back and forth over time. Now for something as small as this, 300mm, I don't think it'll be a concern. If you've got a window sill that actually comes up to about 1 meter and it is as wide as this, there is a chance that could have a bit of movement in it. So that's where I like having the double sill plate to really brace it off and make it solid. Double F17 there does seem a bit full on. I'm not sure if I completely understand why that's a double F17, but that's something I'm starting to see a lot more at the moment. A double sill plate to help strengthen that, to make sure you can't blow it. I think that's pretty much it for our walls. You can see more ply sheets here. We've got our headers for our doorways. For this header here, you can see it's an internal wall. There's no weight loaded on top of it. There's no need for a lintel in there. There's no weight sitting in this door frame. So that's why we get away without having any lintels here. All right, so I think we're pretty much covered quite well on our walls right now. Firstly, you can see these timbers going across here, holding the flooring. These are called posies. They're made off-site for us, and they're made to the sizes of the rooms for upstairs. So it's super simple when we get them. We just got to chuck them up, nail them on, and it's a pretty easy job. You can see on this side here, it's butted into that steel beam, and they're actually top chord supported. That top plate of the posi spans over the steel, and that's why we've got a few blocks there, and that holds it all the way. We've also packed the inside of the steel just so we can get a few nails in the bottom, and those nails are just stopping that posi rolling back and forth over time. Now, since these posies are quite open, they're obviously not as strong as beams, and there is a chance that they can sag in the middle over time. That's why we do have these timber beams running in the inside of them. These are called strongbacks. We push them hard up to the posi. They normally go where these uprights in the posies are. We can see there's one directly above the camera there. And what we do is push these strongbacks hard up to the top plate of the posi, shoot them into those uprights, and that's really going to lock those posies in place. With them done, it actually makes that subfloor really strong, really secure, and you're not going to have any bounce or movement walking on that flooring. Another thing we can see over here is just a few angled timbers on these posies, and that's just counting as a little brace. We do them every 1800. They lock those posies together, and that's once again stopping those posies moving back and forth. Now, I don't know if you can really see it from where we are right now, but on our walls, we have an L bracket right above me, and that's the little bracket that connects the wall to the posi. You can see this wall right now, we've got a fixed point here, but we've got about 2.5 meters before the next fixed point. That means if we had nothing connected to the posies, I can grab this wall and shake it, and it'd be quite loose. So it might be a bit easier to see this one right here, even if you come to where I am, but we have these little L brackets going from the wall to the posi, holding them together. One thing we can notice with the L brackets is that it's actually got some slots where the nails go, and the nails aren't hit all the way in. The reason for that is even though we have our strongbacks in our posi, they're made to carry all the weight from upstairs. Over time, and once you load the roof on, the house is actually going to sag down very, very slightly. And that's expected, it's meant to happen, but if we had those L brackets nailed on, or even if we did blocks on these walls nailed to the posies, and that weight got loaded down, that's going to change this wall here from being a non-load bearing wall, and that weight from upstairs is going to get transferred to this wall. That's why we have those technical L brackets with those slots. So once there's weight loaded upstairs, those nails are going to stay in those slots. The posi is going to drop down. Those nails aren't going to influence it at all, but those nails are still going to stop that wall moving back and forth. So if we make our way through to here, we can see the stair void, and there's a little bit more going on here. Firstly, we do have a beam, a double beam to support the weight from upstairs. This beam's also supporting the posies, and once again, we can see we've got our double load studs on either side holding the weight. But another thing we have are these cyclone ties. We've got to do them in every single beam around the work site, and it's just another thing to stop uplift. Being downstairs and having so much weight in it, I think it's quite unnecessary down here. But the reason for those ties is that we don't want any wind or any movement in this house to actually make those beams lift up over time. So wherever you see a beam downstairs on this frame, or even upstairs on the frame, we're always going to have a couple of studs holding the weight so that beam can't sag down, but then also strap around it so that beam can't lift up. It's definitely something you wouldn't think about building a house. You'd think the weight of everything holds the entire house down, but it does happen if you don't strap your beams and you do get high gust of winds. Everything can lift up on the house frame. All right, so we're going to make our way upstairs. I'm looking around, and I feel like with so many details here, we can actually spend so much time going over every small thing. We'll jump upstairs, there's even more to see up there, and we'll go over a lot of what's going on upstairs. So one thing we did speak about downstairs is how we've got our bottom plate and our top plate. One thing you can notice is that there actually is a double top plate everywhere you look. The lower one is just called our top plate, and our second top plate is called a pitching plate. Now the pitching plate isn't something you have to do. There are other ways around doing it. I think every single frame I've ever done though does have a pitching plate. And what the pitching plate does is it carries the span of the roof trusses if they land between two studs. So we've got a roof truss right here. You can see it's landing directly between the studs. We don't have a stud transferring that weight all the way down, and having that double top plate with that pitching plate allows us to do this. What we're going to do anyway is if we have a joint in the pitching plate like this gap here, we still got a nog on edge below it helping to support that weight. But if we didn't put this pitching plate on, we'd have to do one of those nogs like that underneath every single truss that lands outside the stud. So another thing we have both downstairs and upstairs that I didn't speak about yet are these blocks on top of the wall. They're called shear blocks, and what they're doing is helping that roof not move back and forth. So what we do to help transfer this brace wall to the roof is we've got that trimming block running between the trusses, and then we have our shear blocks butting into it. Our blocks are hardened to that nog so that if this roof wanted to move back and forth, it can't. It's going to be stuck by our shear blocks. It's stuck in there, so there's going to be no movement at all. One thing we have to make sure we don't do is nail through the shear block into that trimming piece though, because as we mentioned earlier, once this roof is loaded up with weight, it could sag down slightly. We don't want to turn that into a load point because that could cause squeaking. We can see next to it, we do have another one of those L brackets, and that's there bracing this wall so there's no movement back and forth. So if we turn our attention to the roofs, these are all pre-made trusses. So we don't make these are made off-site, delivered to us, and we get them up super quickly, just like the posies. I spent a lot of time talking about downstairs, how we've got dynabolts into the ground, we've got straps over the studs, everything's connected down so there's no uplift, and that's definitely the same when it comes to the trusses. One thing we've been doing on this frame, and I haven't done it a lot recently, but you can see through the top plate, we've got a big screw which goes up through the top plate into the truss. That helps hold it down. I'm used to using triple grips, the type of bracing that you shoot off to hold the trusses down, which also works. This way is just a lot easier and quicker to do. And actually something I also want to mention is we do have those concrete screws downstairs holding that frame down. Of course upstairs we've got the same thing. We've got a screw into the plate there, and that is holding the bottom plate down to the posi. Actually, one thing looking down at the floor that I haven't spoken about is we've also got our timber floor here. These are our yellow tongue sheet timber flooring, and you'll see the color changes when we get to our wet areas. And you can see in these wet areas where the bathroom and toilet is, we've got these James Hardie Skyline sheets, and the reason we've got these sheets here is that they're prepped for tiles to go straight onto them. You can see our step down as well. This is going to be where our shower is. We have a 50mm step down upstairs, and we've actually got the same thing downstairs. I don't think we actually went over any of them, but in the concrete slab you do have the step down for your showers. I want to get stuck onto the roof, get talking about the roof, and it might even be easier if we go around to the back here and we have a look at those lower roofs. Now we can do so many videos and spend so much time talking about roofs. There's so many different ways you can do roofs, different ways you can brace roofs. For this video, we're just going to talk about what we have here, and this is known as a flat roof. Obviously there is going to be full on it. It's just a very shallow 2-degree slope, and all the water's flowing down into that box gutter over there. Box gutters are super common in new houses these days. A lot of old houses obviously have your old eave gutters. We can see in any of the neighbouring properties over there, you've got your tiled roof onto a typical eave gutter. The way these box gutters work is the water's just going to flow into that big gutter. Those valley boards are on a slope leading to the back of the house, and they're going to run out into a rain head, and you're just going to have a pipe coming down the side of the house. The best thing about the box gutters is we've got this extra wall behind them, which is called a parapet wall. And what that does is conceal the roof and the gutters. So once you have a look at this house when it's completed, you're going to see our wall run all the way up. That's going to be hebled and rendered, and you're not going to see any roof at all or any gutters. It makes it a really nice modern look, and it's the way a lot of these new houses are getting built as well. Obviously upstairs we've got the exact same thing. You can see the roofers have already gone through, and we've got that little metal tray in there for our box gutter. A few other things we have in this roof too is we framed out some openings here for some skylights. Obviously all the stuff we're talking about right now, I can go into crazy detail, and I've done the whole series building this house from start to finish so far. And all of those videos, we've gone really deep into details about marking out walls, building the roofs, and even building our skylights like this. So I've done the frame for the skylight. Obviously there's a lot of step-ins for it right now. We've built it so it's good for the top, and the roofers can roof it and put that skylight on. And obviously for the inside, we still have to frame that out, and we're going to be doing that in lock-up stage. Once the house is locked up, it's all been hebled, the roof's on, then we've got so much work to do inside. Framing out for our skylights like this, straightening the walls, building fireplaces downstairs, building bulkheads. There's so much more work that we do have to do. Actually, I was speaking about how these roofs all have box gutters. If we have a look through there to that garage, we can actually see one roof out there which doesn't have a box gutter. The reason for that is that this house is built so close to the boundary and we didn't get permits to have a parapet wall up there. That parapet wall was going to exceed the building height that we had. So that's why we've got one roof like that, which is going to have your typical eave gutter. Another thing you can see, it's probably easy to see on that roof too, is we do have these metal straps going across the roof. They're called speed brace, and all they're doing is locking that roof together on those angles so that roof can't move back and forth. It helps lock that frame all together. Now, if you've watched this whole series we've done so far on building this house from start to finish, you know how much is really involved, how technical this whole process is. So I've done my best to just talk on the top of my head about everything you can see so far in this frame. I know editing this video, I'm going to think of so many things I didn't cover, and that's why this whole frame in a house series has been so well. We've dedicated a full episode for every single stage of the frame. You've seen us build everything so far. I've talked about processes, why certain things are done, and this video is just a good quick overview of the frame. This frame is almost done. As I've mentioned while making this video, there are a few small things we have to do here and there to finish it off, and once it is done, I'm going to be continuing the same series of building this house from start to finish, and we're going to jump on the lockup. We're going to be building pergolas, doing the decks, doing the fix, hanging all the doors, and we're going to be covering all of that stuff in great detail once again.